Good afternoon and welcome to Liquid Lunch with the Regional Water Authority here on 103.5 WNHH. You can watch us anytime on video on the New Haven Independence YouTube page. You can listen to us on podcast on Apple or Spotify if you've missed any of our prior shows. I'm Kevin Watsey. I am the Regional Water Authority's Director of Public Affairs, and I am a water nerd. And today's show, we're going to talk a little bit about water. We're going to talk a lot about the environment. If you've listened to one of our recent shows, we had on Nicole Smith, who is the Regional Water Authority's resident arborist and natural resources analyst, and she educated us all about trees. And I made the joke with her that arborists can see the trees through the forest. Well, today, we're going to talk to the Regional Water Authority's two foresters because they could see the forest through the trees. I'm thrilled to welcome Casey Cords and Josh Tracy. They are foresters at the Regional Water Authority. I asked them to come on because I thought it would be a nice compliment to our show about trees to talk about the importance of forests. You know, because trees are important, forests are important in a different way, and we're going to talk all about that. The Regional Water Authority owns and maintains 28,000 acres of land. A lot of that is forested land. And those forests are very important to water quality. So Casey and Josh are here. They're going to tell us all about the importance of forests. And before we do that, though, we're going to start our show like we do every show. We're going to ask Casey and Josh to tell us their stories, how they got to where they are at the Regional Water Authority, about their upbringing, their education. So we'll start with Casey. Casey, tell us your story.
Well, I was raised in the Midwest, which I am very proud of, in a suburb just outside of Chicago. My family's traditionally garden farmers or nurserymen that lived on the northwest side of Chicago, grew fruits and vegetables, and then would bring those into the city to sell to city dwellers. So we all have a bit of a green thumb in our family, and I went to college, got an undergraduate degree in biology, and during my senior year, I took this great course called limnology, which is the study of freshwater ecosystems. And it was sort of a capstone course for me in that it kind of drew in all of the courses that I had had prior to that time on geology, chemistry, hydrology, plants, animals, and sort of pointed me in the direction of wanting to work to better the health of ecosystems. So my original career was in the aquaculture fisheries fields. I spent a couple years teaching people in the South Pacific how to raise freshwater fish in small ponds. And then when I came back, I got into environmental consulting. I realized that everybody whose job I wanted had a graduate degree, so I went back to school for a graduate degree in environmental management, and my first term back, I took a silviculture course, which is the study of forested ecosystems, and I changed paths right then and there. So I have a forester's degree, a master's in forestry, and I have been a certified forester in Connecticut since 1998. Spent a couple of years back in consulting right after graduating from school, and then I've spent the most of my career working for the water utility industry in Connecticut, mostly publicly owned water treatment systems.
That's awesome. And if we didn't know you were from the Midwest because you told us you just saying city dwellers was enough to know that you were from the Midwest. When you say South Pacific, you're talking like Indonesia, like that South, or like Bora Bora kind of South Pacific?
More Bora Bora, if you can believe it. Fiji. So Fiji's two main islands are the size of the big island of Hawaii. So in the interior of these islands, there's not a lot of protein sources. So freshwater fisheries, raising fish in small ponds is a good supplement to a diet that's heavy in carbohydrates.
And I guess you would argue that New Haven is better than Fiji?
In what way?
The fact that you're here and not there. I don't know. Thanks, Casey. Josh, tell us your story.
Yeah, so I grew up in northeast Connecticut, a little town called Canterbury. I spent a lot of time in the forest, just playing around and building forts and doing things kids do in the woods. But for high school, I decided to go to a trade school. I wanted to become a plumber like my dad. And once I was there, I decided maybe plumbing wasn't for me. I decided to do electrical. And so I spent 4 years thinking I was going to be an electrician. But towards my senior year, I got a scholarship to go to UConn. So I decided to give college a shot. I wasn't really intending to go to university, but they wanted me to go, so I figured I'd try it. I went for natural resources. So I wanted to originally work with water quality, which kind of ties into my work here at Regional Water Authority, but I didn't quite know what my plans were with that degree. So when I left college, I joined the Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection and joined their wildlife team. So I worked with rabbits for a little while and realized I enjoyed working with wildlife, but getting into the wildlife career is difficult. Everybody wants to work with deer. Everybody wants to work with wolves and all the cool animals. And so it's a tough field to get into. But working at Regional Water Authority, I realized that you could work with any animal you want by manipulating habitat, and you manipulate habitat through forestry. And so becoming a forester at Regional, we both are able to change the landscape for water quality, but I can also change it to help wildlife that's imperiled or looking to have their environment improved. So I was able to take that path, and so I've been a forester since 2019 or so, all through the Regional Water Authority. I did not go to school to become a forester. I learned on the job how to manage our forests. So I've only ever been a watershed forester my entire career.
And you also handle our invasive species management program, correct?
That's true. I've been a forester for those years, but for most of my time at Regional, I've gone out and fought the fight against the invasive species. We're going to get more into that a little bit further in the show,
yes,
but
we are.
We have lots of invasives, and we could take as much time as we wanted, and we'd still probably not be able to cover it all.
And if you're watching us on YouTube, and Josh and Casey may look familiar if you're watching WTNH last week, we're right now in the third week of June, but WTNH was nice enough to do a story on this very cool, very hot technology, actually, that we're using to try and eradicate invasive vegetation on our property, and we will talk more about that later. But guys, thank you. Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
When I do these shows, I always like to start at the very, very beginning with the most basic of questions. So I will start, and I'll just leave it up to one of you. I'm not really going to direct questions to either one of you, but at its simplest terms, what is a forester? You're both foresters. What is a forester?
Yeah, so basically a forester, I like to tell people that we're almost like tree lawyers, right? We have this understanding of the law that goes with how to perform forestry properly, and we can act as an intermediary between, say, a person who owns land and wants to sell some of their wood. We can act as that intermediary between the person who's coming to harvest the wood and the person who's selling the wood. We are legally allowed to develop silvicultural plans for the landowner. We can decide if the landowner wants to improve their habitat for birds. We can develop a plan that will hopefully move towards that goal. Or for deer, or they just want to make money, and some people, that's their goal. We can develop plans that will help them out with that. And so we look at the forest holistically. As you said, we look at the forest for the trees. And so we can identify tree species, we can estimate how much wood is in the forest, and we can determine what kind of forest will regenerate based on what we remove and what we leave behind.
So it's really about the health of the forest, right? I mean, you guys are trained to kind of look at a forest and maintain the health of that forest. And why does it matter? Why does a healthy forest matter? Why? I guess I'll just kind of start there. Why, if I'm just Kevin living in Naugatuck, Connecticut, why do I care for a healthy forest?
These days, from the Regional Water Authority's perspective, it's healthy forests that provide clean water for our customers. Unhealthy forests do not do the job as well as healthy forests. So I think of foresters being sort of applied ecologists that are manipulating elements of the landscape to enhance the forest for societal benefits. And in the number one benefit for regional water authorities customers for our forests is the clean water that they produce for us. Other benefits include wildlife habitat, recreation, great recreational opportunities. They produce some forest products that help offset the costs of running these programs. So they do a lot of work in a lot of different varieties, areas that affect our lives positively.
And do you need to be an arborist to be a forester? Like, are the two mutually exclusive? Because I would think you can be an arborist without being a forester, but it'd be harder to be a forester without at least having some arborist in you. Am I wrong in that?
You know, it's interesting. Casey is actually an arborist and a forester.
Ooh.
So he's one of the few in the state that have a double license. I'm solely a forester. Each license kind of comes with different things that you can do with it. You know, I described kind of what a forester is. We're looking at the landscape holistically on a large scale, whereas arborists are looking closer at each individual tree they're tackling, and they're saying, what are the issues with this tree, and how can I remedy those issues with this one tree? Casey and I look at the forest as a whole and say, okay, what is this forest bringing to the table, and is there a way that we can improve the outcome of this forest? So no, to be a forester, you do need to have a license. There's an exam that goes along with it, just as with an arborist. The exam is different than an arborist exam. There's some playful banter between the two sides of which exam is more difficult. You know, Casey can describe which. Yeah,
which one's more difficult, Case?
Foresters, without a doubt.
Really? Because so Nicole was telling us that part of her exam was she walked through, I think, an area at Yale, and they just pointed to 20 different trees, and she had to identify those 20 random trees. That to me sounds pretty hard. But you say that the forester exam is much more difficult than the
most
arborist
foresters
exam?
can probably identify 50 to 100 trees, shrubs
without an issue.
Without an issue, no.
And so, Josh, like, if Casey's not around, do you consult a lot with Nicole? Like, as you're doing your forestry, like, will you bring her into your world to kind of tag team?
It depends. I would say that, you know, so with an arborist license, you're able to do more with. Say if you're wanting to control certain species, or looking at ornamentals, arborists are very good at identifying ornamental trees that aren't naturally growing in our native forests. I can walk through the woods in the winter and pick out the different trees just based on bark characteristics. But if I come across, you know, maybe a Coosa dogwood, or, you know, that's randomly in the forest, you know, there's a lot of species that could naturally pop up that are not native to Connecticut that are necessarily a bad thing.
Doesn't grow as a spiral.
Right. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I'll gladly bring someone like Nicole in, and Casey's a good example of someone who knows both many of the native species as well as the typical species people are planting in their backyards that I'm not as familiar with.
So let's kind of take a step back here. So we're going to talk mostly about the water company, but Connecticut in general, is Connecticut what you would consider a heavily forested state, or are we highly developed? Because I've only been here 2 years, so
the answer
to me it seems very forested, but I may be wrong.
It's very forested.
Yeah.
It's one of the highest numbers of people living in the highest density of forests in the country. So it's one of the more heavily forested states. And if you just look at it from the air, it's hard to see houses because the yards tend to be on the smaller side and they're covered by trees. When you look at a certain angle from an airplane or something like that, it looks completely forested.
Is there any one species or type of tree that's like dominant in the state? Far, is it more evergreens or giant oaks? Or?
Yeah, oaks are probably predominantly the species you're going to find in Connecticut. You know, the oak industry is prevalent here. Oak is used in barrels that they make whiskey from. The white oak, red oak, and white oak flooring are a staple of our Connecticut hardwoods. But you will find lots of sugar maples. You know, we're not Vermont or New Hampshire, but there is a sugaring industry here, and you can find lots of maple syrup producers in Connecticut. But a lot of mixed hardwoods is what we classify it.
Is there a logging industry in Connecticut, like a formal logging industry in Connecticut?
There is, yeah.
Yeah.
It's there's so in the forestry industry we have high grade markets and low grade markets. Low grade markets are those markets that are looking at railroad ties, the wood blocks that are used to hold the rails together. You're looking at trim and pallets and things that you don't think of as beautiful, we'll say, things that are
MDF.
more utilitarian.
Yeah.
And then you have high grade markets. That's your veneer. That's the facade of your door. That's the beautiful furniture you have. That wood goes for a much higher value, and those two markets differ in that way. And you need different mills that can process those woods in different ways. And some of that wood gets shipped as far as Canada and over to China. Once that's taken, depending on how much money someone's willing to pay for it.
That's interesting. I never really thought of Connecticut as having a logging industry, but I guess we got a lot of forests, and
You drive up to northern New England, a log truck on the road, sharing the road with a log truck is a fairly common occurrence. And it may not be as a common occurrence in Connecticut, but they're definitely out there.
they are out there. And so it begs the question, if I'm out there and I think the RWA is just a water company, why do we have two foresters on staff? We're a water company. We have pipe in the ground. So what's with you guys?
As you mentioned earlier, we own 20,000 acres.
28.
20,000 acres of forest land, 27,000 acres of land. Some of that's covered in water, so we don't get involved with those areas as much. So from a forestry perspective, we usually use the term 20,000 acres. And that's a lot of land for one forester to manage. And in the environment in which we're managing it, in many suburban locations, there's a lot of stressors. Invasive species is one that we've already alluded to. It takes that many foresters to keep the forest healthy.
And do our forests differ from what we just talked about, the state forest? Are we mostly oak on our lands, or because I've been out there a little bit. Seems like we have a lot of evergreens, but it may just be the areas that I've been on. So do we reflect the state?
Some of this is the legacy of past land uses. So the oaks are a legacy of a huge period of charcoal production back in the late 1800s to early 1900s. And at that same time, which was right smack dab in the progressive area, people thought we were going to run out of wood in a few decades. And so a lot of well-meaning people started planting trees. And some of those trees were conifers. Water companies planted a lot of conifer stands around reservoirs that they were constructing so that we wouldn't run out of water. And so a lot of our pure conifer stands are a result of those efforts.
Conifers are evergreens.
Correct.
Right.
Yes. Correct.
For the uneducated. So let's kind of tie this all together a little bit. So as Casey rightly corrected me, so we have about 20,000 acres of forested land, which leaves 7,000 to 8,000 acres of land that's covered with our reservoirs, our drinking water sources. So we talked about a healthy forest, why it's important to kind of the environment and all, but can you help tie the two together about like water quality and why a water company like ours wants and needs a healthy forest to protect the water quality, kind of make that connection for us? Yeah,
so one of the big reasons, probably the most important reason to have a forest is the filtration properties a forest has. So when you have a forest that's near our reservoirs, the integrated root systems that those trees create a filtration. So when it rains and we get a heavy rain, inches and inches of rain, that water isn't directly migrating to the water. We don't want it to be picking up soil and other measures. And we want to prevent erosion, basically, into our reservoirs. Having that extensive root system allows water to percolate into the soil, and once it's in the soil, it takes time to run through the soil, and through that process, it's being filtered. So once it gets into our reservoirs, it's fairly clean. What that does is it reduces the amount of time and effort we need to spend to treat the water, and having those forests there provide shade for the streams that are going into the water. Shade is very important for streams because it reduces the amount of algae and allows for the settling of some of these tannins and other chemicals that we don't necessarily want into our water. Having a forest also is great for carbon sequestration and carbon storage. So we want to have a lot of forest on our property because even though that is it's both a benefit to us, but it's a benefit to the state and to the world as a whole to have these forests because of how much carbon that they're absorbing.
Right.
So
they're absorbing carbon and they're putting out oxygen.
That's right.
That we need to breathe. Quick fact or fiction, something that I heard, which I think is true. During the summer, when we have a full canopy in our forest, is it true that like 25 to 30% of the rain never actually hits the ground? That the leaves on the trees just kind of catch it? And is that true?
So when they do a mass balance of rainfall events, one of the factors in that mass balance equation is interception. And interception is the rain that falls on leaves and evaporates before it ever hits the ground. So I don't know if it's 20-25%. That seems a little high to me, but it is a significant factor in that equation.
And that could in some ways, like, here's where I kind of go off the path that I planned on walking. That can kind of in some ways contribute to drought, right? Because, okay, we need rain, and then we get rain, but if even 20% of that rain is actually never reaching the ground and the reservoirs, then that's just less inventory for us, right? I mean,
yeah.
Am I overthinking this?
No, if you get a quarter inch of rain, a huge percentage of that probably isn't even making it to the soil. So the number that you're mentioning, that percentage is probably close, but you do need to hit a certain point where once everything's saturated, the water can then make it through and get through to the soil. And the more healthy the trees are, the larger the leaves, the larger the canopy, the more integrated those canopies are, the less likely that water is to reach the ground level. So, there is a certain point where you need a certain amount of water to reach the ground, to saturate the ground and migrate through the ground to our reservoirs. Otherwise, it's just the water that's directly raining into the reservoir.
Right. And I guess a good example of this that I just thought of is, if it rained overnight, but now in the morning it's all sunny and a good gust of wind, all of a sudden you're getting pelted with water. It's because that rain overnight stayed on the trees and the wind's knocking it off, and now you're getting all wet. So, all right, let's get back.
I think of it as a question of quality over quantity. Yes, the trees will absorb some of that water and evapotranspirate it back up into the atmosphere before ever it reaches our reservoirs, but the water that is reaching the reservoir is much purer. So the forests are basically our first filtration plant.
I'm learning so much here. So we've talked a few times. We brought up invasive species, and I imagine when we talk about the health of a forest, that's one of the biggest things you're looking at is invasives. As a side note, the RWA has this recreation program, and as part of that, we offer, classes on certain Saturdays where folks like Casey and Josh will actually teach you how to identify trees and how to, healthy forestry and things like that. I went to one of those last year, and I heard a great explanation. It may have been you, Casey, that gave it, or it could have been Josh, about the difference between invasive species and non-native species. So can I guess one of you kind of talk about that? Because we throw invasive around, but it was only recently when I learned it from you guys that there is a big difference between invasive and non-native. So
it's probably Josh.
Yeah. So
I think I went to one of your invasive species walks.
Yeah. So there's a lot of plants in Connecticut that people will look at and tell you this is invasive, and they'll basically go off of the fact that there's a lot of that plant in an area. People will say poison ivy is invasive, sumac is invasive. It's typically plants that they don't like and they don't want, so they're going to call it invasive, and it kind of justifies their reasoning for removing it. But Connecticut Invasive Plant Working Group in Connecticut has a 9 criteria that if a plant meets all 9 criteria, you can consider it invasive. The first and most important thing is it cannot be local. It cannot be a native species. So none of our native species are invasive. They can be aggressive, They can grow everywhere and grow up trees and be all over the place, but they are not invasive just because they are aggressive. If it is a non-native and it is aggressive, then that's 2 other criteria. And so you keep walking down these 9 criteria. It has to be able to be spread by multiple means, whether it's birds or water or anthropogenic means like people digging them up and replanting them, or picking up a pile of soil that has the seeds in them and putting them into another area and spreading that soil. Once that plant meets those 9 criteria, then it can be considered an invasive species. And then the Connecticut Invasive Plant Working Group will make recommendations on whether or not it should be banned from sale, or if it's something that we just need to monitor to make sure it doesn't spread out of control. But if it's native, and you can easily Google, where a plant is native to, and if it's native to Connecticut, then it won't be considered an invasive. That doesn't mean you shouldn't get rid of it if it's poison ivy and it's in your garden that you're always working in. Yeah, feel free to remove it. But as people out in the forest, we love birds and we keep poison ivy everywhere we can, that we're not interacting with because the birds love it so much. Bittersweet, Japanese barberry, multiflora rose, we have no problem getting rid of that stuff because it's heavily invasive and it is a nuisance.
Yeah, so I guess some native plants can be jerks, and some non-native plants can be just fine. It's really, like you said, when all those things add up to invasive, that's when it becomes an issue.
That's right. There's plenty of plants that people have in their gardens that are from Europe, Australia, Japan, China, that only grow in one place. They don't move. They play nice. They look beautiful, and feel free to plant as many of those as you want in your yard. But some of the ones on the invasive plant list, I implore everybody to Google that. There's about 100 plants on the invasive plant list. If you have any of those plants in your yard, feel free to remove them as fast as you can.
No matter how pretty they are. So when we talk about invasives, we tend to talk, like you said, you rattled off a whole bunch, but those are more like, I don't want to say weeds, but vegetation. Are there invasive trees? Mm-hmm. So what would be a good example of an invasive, like a truly invasive tree? And what makes whatever you're going to name so invasive to the forest?
There's one that Josh spent probably the first couple of years of his career at RWA cutting down almost every day during this, was that Tree of Heaven, right?
Tree of Heaven,
yeah. So that's introduced from Northeast Asia, and it's just very aggressive. It fits that aggressive characteristic that Josh was just talking about. It's clonal. It roots sprouts. So once you get one tree established, it will pop up little trees all around it, which are actually attached to the original mother tree, and it'll just slowly take over a whole area. And it's a further concern now because it's the host plant for the spotted lanternfly.
I was just going to say that.
Beat you to the punch.
You did.
So sometimes not only is it just one tree that's invasive, but then it'll create a host of problems associated with it.
And so how does a tree get from anywhere, Asia, to the east coast of the United States? How did, like, Tree of Heaven find its way over here? Somebody had to be human, right? I mean, there aren't birds flying from Asia to here and bringing seeds with them, or maybe there are. Maybe I'm completely wrong.
In many cases, most of these plants get here by one of two ways, either on purpose or on accident. Tree of Heaven, my guess is, I know that there's a lot of research on its properties in taking up heavy metals. So in some cases, they'll plant Tree of Heaven on brownfield sites, on areas where they know there's lots of chemicals in the soil as a means of uptaking those chemicals, and then they'll dispose of the wood off-site in some safe way. I don't know if they were brought over for that purpose. I don't know if they were brought over because they are very pretty. They are unique. They kind of resemble a palm tree, and they produce these beautiful clusters of seeds that are kind of green and red, which is one of the reasons why they're so invasive, is because they can produce hundreds and hundreds of pounds of seeds on every single female tree. This is a special type of tree that has male and female. Think of your hollies. Holly trees are native, but there's male hollies and there's female hollies. One has berries, one does not. With these tree of heaven, there's one that produces seeds and there's one that doesn't. The ones that do produce seeds, they kind of leave the tree like a helicopter, and it's called wind dispersed. So when a big gust of wind blows through, all these seeds blow. They can blow hundreds and hundreds of feet away from the tree, establishing a new population of tree of heaven out from underneath the canopy of the mother. So, was it brought here accidentally? Was a seed, some seeds brought over in a shipping container with other plants, or was it brought over here for a purpose? That I'm not sure, but we have plenty of examples of these plants being brought over for certain purposes that they kind of went haywire after that.
So here's my brain again. So you mentioned the helicopter. That's those helicopter seeds. Are there other trees that do that, or is that tree of heaven every time I see one of those?
Nope. The maples, all the maples have them. They're called samaras. So the maples produce them, tulips produce them, and they could all be designed differently if you put, they've all evolved in different ways, but they all are able to blow in the wind and kind of find themselves in new locations. Trees have adapted to have some way of not growing underneath their mother tree.
Right.
So if you think of an oak and acorns, we have blue jays and squirrels that will pick them up and bury them somewhere that's outside of that mother tree. Any tree that produces berries, the birds are eating them, flying away, and pooping them out somewhere. So trees do not want their offspring growing beneath them because they get shaded out and die. They want them spread far and wide.
It's interesting, I used to love those little helicopter seeds when I was a kid. So as foresters at the RWA, are you guys out in the forest every day? Like, I mean, we have 20,000 acres of forest, so I imagine you got to be out there a lot, right? I mean,
we are. There's also a fair bit of office work at times that we usually reserve for inclement weather, but this time of year, when the weather's fine or even not so fine, we're out there a lot.
And what are you doing out there? Like, specifically, if you go out this week, what are you doing out there to help manage the forest?
Well, for me, it's right in the middle of firewood season, so we have 160 permittees scattered throughout our holdings in southern New Haven County, and these permittees cut firewood to heat their homes in the wintertime, and sometimes they cut an extra quarter here or there for sale, but they're out there helping us manage the forest, helping us get rid of diseased trees or trees that are crowding out, and helping us free up better formed trees that will be more valuable in the future if they have allowed more growing space. So we have 160 of these woodcutters, and they need to know which trees to remove and which ones to keep, and that's my job, is to mark those trees for removal.
So you manage that program for us, and so each person in that program gets their own little plot of the forest, and then you're going out there and spray painting or tagging a tree, saying this one can come down, that one can come down, and then do you make sure that they're only cutting those down? Like, do you ever have problems with they're cutting trees that they shouldn't, or do they pretty much behave themselves?
So usually I put a spray paint mark, or I use a paint gun at about eye level, so that cutter knows that tree's marked for removal, and then I put another paint mark at the stump. So when I go out and are looking at the job that these guys are doing, I go up to every stump, and I better see a paint mark on that stump, because if there isn't one, then I know that they're cutting trees that they shouldn't be cutting, and that gets them marked for removal from the program. So that's sort of my receipt I like to tell people.
Interesting.
Yep.
What about you, Josh? If you're going out this week, what kind of management activities are you working on?
Yeah, so this week, Casey and I will also go out and we'll start marking large-scale forest management opportunities. So there's one that we'll be working at Lake Saltonstall. Lake Saltonstall is one of our recreation areas. It has a lot of fishing going on there, and there's a hillside leading down towards the reservoir that we've identified as what we consider fully stocked or nearly overstocked, which just means that it's getting to the tipping point where if we don't do something about it, the trees are probably going to start dying off and falling down, and it won't be as beneficial for the reservoir if we let that happen. So we're kind of at the crunch point to start performing some of this management. So Casey and I will go out and we're experimenting with this thing called a slash wall. A slash wall, you basically perform the management at the site, and any of the residual material left behind, you stack into a wall that's 12 feet tall and 20 feet wide around the entire area. So in this case, it's going to be about 40 acres that we're managing. And so this wall is built to prevent deer from entering the site. Deer can eat something like 1,200 seedlings a day. And in an area where we do this management, we want our native trees to come back. And if there's too many deer, they can eat so many of our seedlings that we don't see any regeneration. So if we want to take care of the deer, there's only three things we can do. We can either kill them, we can find some way to stop them from reproducing, or we can exclude them from the site. And so this has become the preferred method by foresters. It's an experiment that's coming out of Cornell University in New York. And so this area is going to have one of these slash walls on it. And so Casey and I are out there. We're identifying trees that can be removed and be used as part of the wall in its construction. And so hopefully by spring of next year, 2026, we'll have a completed wall, and it'll start that process of building a young, resilient native forest in this area that is on the verge of degrading just because of its age and the point it's at in its lifetime.
So, and if I'm a recreation pass holder and I know nothing about this project, to me it's going to look like, oh my God, they're cutting the forest down.
That's right.
And then they're just building a giant wall. Like, what are they doing? But this is a tried and true. Well, not tried and true, but this is a forest management technique. Is it clear cut? Or are you going to leave some old growth within that 40 acres, or is it just clear cut, start from new, all 40 acres?
No, we will be leaving residual trees, and though it may not be. Casey and I saying we leave residual trees sounds a lot different than the average person. There's all different types of cuts that can be done. There's a type of cut called a shelter wood, where you leave about 40% of the residual trees behind, and you remove 60%. We're probably leaving more like 10 to 20% of the trees on the site, and we're mostly leaving those as a seed source. We're selecting the trees that have the best genetics. We're selecting trees that are diverse. We want to have a few oaks. We want to have hickories, maples, sassafras, black gum. We want to have a whole gamut of different tree species that can regrow, so that when it starts to regrow, it's both resilient against insects and diseases, but it's also going to be resilient against natural disasters like wildfires, hurricanes, tornadoes, things of that nature. Having a young forest just hedges our bets against destruction, basically.
So is this are we letting Mother Nature reseed this area, or are we going to be planting saplings in that area, or a little bit of both?
A little bit of both. The nice thing about the slash wall is that when we do plant trees now without a slash wall, we have to protect them heavily from deer. So each little tree gets its own tree tube or tree cage or something to try to keep the deer from destroying it. So the nice thing about these slash walls is it allows us an opportunity to do a lot of larger scale plantings to test trees, like trees that grow in New Jersey and places like that are just a little outside their range, but in 20 or 30 years we might have New Jersey's climate. So let's see how these trees are doing. Let's see if that will become part of the trees of the future. So, and then there's other trees that are we've lost a seed source for them through previous forest management efforts, or just the fact that most of Connecticut was farmland at one point. So it's an opportunity in these slash walls to bring back particular species that are beneficial to wildlife, like forest neotropical migrant birds and those sorts of things. So we plant a lot of more, I'd say, fruiting trees like hackberries and things like that in these slash walls.
And so you're thinking by this time next year that slash wall should be done and doing what it's supposed to be doing, protecting the area, like if weather and everything else goes according to plan?
Well, that's the key, is the weather has to play nice. With these operations, we try to get them done as fast as possible in the most opportune times, and this particular job will most likely be winter, just due to the fact that there's boxwood turtles on the site. Bats utilize the site as well as eagles, and we want to make sure that all of those players are hibernating or off the site while we're performing the management. The ground is typically frozen. In a typical New England winter, the ground would be frozen, and that means the machines that are going to be used won't have as heavy an impact, meaning there won't be lots of mud and ruts and things of that nature. We want to try to preserve the ground as best we can, so if we can do it when there's a good hard snow cover over it, that would be opportune. But as you said, the weather has to play nice, and so we won't have our contractors working during certain conditions just to preserve the quality of the site. And that could impact the timeline that the job gets done. So in some cases, it might take a few years for some of these jobs to get done, just because we want to make sure the site stays as pristine as possible. Having the work done is important, but maintaining the quality of the soil and the ground right next to our reservoirs is paramount.
So they do no harm.
So our first 2 slash walls, one took about 2.5 years to complete, and the other one took 4 months. So
and how are they doing now? Are they having the desired effect?
So our first 2 slash walls were constructed as an experiment in partnership with the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station. So they didn't enclose the whole harvest area. So there's areas outside of the wall to compare to what's going on inside the wall. And it's like night and day. The outside areas are still subject to a lot of deer browsing. And you don't get the number of trees, you don't get the growth in the trees, you don't get the diversity of the trees outside of the slash wall compared to inside the slash wall. It's amazing.
So I'm going to ask what maybe the dumbest question you've gotten about this, but you said the wall's about 12 feet high.
Yeah.
Are you building a door? How are you looking in there? I mean,
we
is there a door?
We do. We have both the walls have a screen door.
Really? Okay.
Yep.
So it wasn't a dumb question.
No. Yeah. I mean, in all reality, you probably do not need to have a door, but for our purpose, because these are so new, we want to keep them accessible to people, the public. If we want to do recreation events there, we can bring people in to show them what's going on.
I guess to monitor too. I mean, you need some way to actually get over the wall to get in there to see. Because I guess something like a squirrel's not an issue because they could just climb the wall, and are they? Yeah.
So we have had game cameras set up at our slash walls, and we've seen every conceivable large mammal inside the slash wall. We even have a few deer in some of them because we're still learning how to construct them. But it keeps everything out, except it keeps everything can get in except deer.
Okay.
So
and just probably less quantities, right? Because some animals just don't have a desire to climb a 12-foot wall.
Yeah, and in some cases, the most difficult part isn't the deer jumping over; it's the fact that they can army crawl underneath the wall. There's cases where the wall wasn't constructed as airtight as it could have been, or after a little while, wood starts to rot, it dries out, it breaks, it cracks, and then it opens up voids. And sometimes those deer can take advantage of those voids. But at the beginning, we were concerned about any deer getting in, but we're realizing that even if a few deer get in, if 25% of the deer get in that could have been on the site, these sites are producing so much native regeneration that the deer can't eat it all.
Oh, okay.
However, had those walls not been there and you have hordes of deer going through, then you're stuck. But once those plants get above deer browse height and that wall degrades, as many deer as can go in there are welcome to go back. We just want native trees to regrow, and they need to get above 7-8 feet, and then the deer can have their fun.
So that's you just made me think of something I didn't think about. At a certain point, does the wall come down? Like the two that are up there now, in 10 years or so, do you take that wall down once everything's kind of grown to a certain amount, or is it going to be there until it disintegrates naturally? Or
the latter, until it disintegrates naturally. There's no real value in going in there and deconstructing the wall because we're seeing trees grow up through it because they tend to be places where blue jays will put acorns, and it's even areas that are technically outside the wall. If there's enough brush, trees can get established outside the wall and grow up through the brush. There's no reason why we'd want to then deconstruct that and possibly damage those trees.
It's so interesting. So I have one more forest question, I think, and then we'll turn to the unrelated questions. But Josh, you mentioned wildfire. Casey, you brought up New Jersey. I'm from New Jersey, so I think about the Pine Barrens in New Jersey, which I grew up around. And we've always been told, like, wildfires are not the worst thing in the world for, like, a pine forest, because that's how the heat is what opens, it gets the seeds out there. So do you two foresters consider wildfires as a good forest management technique in some, or management thing in some cases? Or is fire always bad, like Frankenstein would say?
It depends on location. I think in Connecticut, it would be a very hard sell, just because, as I said before, we're basically a large population in a pretty small state living in the middle of a forest. Yeah. And if you do a prescribed burn, things could get out of hand very quickly. I'm all for, like, using fire to maintain warm season meadows and things like that. I think that can be done safely in this state. But South New Jersey pine barrens are a unique habitat that we don't have much of here in Connecticut. There is some burning that's done by the Nature Conservancy and by the State Division of Forestry, but I don't see it becoming a management tool for us here at Regional Water Authority.
Though in areas where forest fires do occur, you won't see better regeneration of native forests outside of those areas. It's one of the reasons our forests kind of evolved around forest fires. We have pitch pine that they have cones that are called serotinous. They are closed. You described pines that open up like this. They need heat to open up to reseed. Lots of our thicker barked trees like oaks, they're slow growing because they could survive these fires. So if you have a forest that's composed of birches and beeches and some maples that are thinner bark, they grow really fast. But when the fire goes through and kills all those trees, the ones left behind are the pitch pine and the oak. And so they can continue growing and they can take over the forest at that point. Without those fires in our ecosystems, we're getting predominantly birch, beech, and thinner barked trees as a forest component over our oaks. And so that's kind of scary because those trees don't live as long. They're more susceptible to dying sooner versus our oaks, and they don't provide nearly the same amount of habitat value as other trees. So these slash walls allow us to somewhat mimic that sort of disturbance. When we do a clear cut, it kind of emulates what happens when a forest fire rolls through and opens up a lot of the ground for sunlight, where oaks can start growing, and they can typically outcompete any invasive or any of these quick growing natives just because we're giving them the right conditions to grow.
Well, there you have it, folks. We've spent a lot of time talking about forests. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, but we're going to turn now to our 5 unrelated questions. This is our chance to get to know our guests a little bit better by asking them 5 questions that have nothing to do with anything we just talked about for the last 45 or 50 minutes. So we'll start with Josh. Do you have any pets?
Yes, I have a fish tank that has a gigantic pleco in it, probably about 14 inches.
The pleco is the one with the sucker
fish.
Fish. There you go. Bottom feeder. Side feeder.
Yeah, his name's Leviathan.
Leviathan. He's the only one in the tank?
There's 2
goldfish.
There's 2 Coriodoras, which are also bottom feeders, that are in there too. I like the bottom feeders.
You like the bottom feeders. What about you, Casey? Any pets?
No pets for us.
If you were going to get a pet, what would you get?
A cat, but my wife is highly allergic.
Oh, my wife is highly allergic too, but we still have a cat. Casey, favorite band or musician?
Bob Dylan.
Bob Dylan. Josh?
Camp, which is a somewhat indie bluegrass artist.
Indie bluegrass. So Banjo.
was just in New Haven last week, right?
Camp was?
Weren't they?
Oh, were they? Yeah.
I'll have to look. I guess I missed it.
Banjos and
Not necessarily banjos, but really good, storytelling songs.
Oh, okay.
And that sort of thing.
Interesting. Josh, favorite hobby?
Oh, bonsai.
Yes, so Josh is a bonsai expert. He has a very cool maple tree in our office right now that's 25 years old and only about 20 inches high.
Yeah, I love big trees and I love little trees. Bonsai Society of Greater New Haven. Feel free to visit us.
There you go. Casey, favorite hobby outside of work?
It sounds a lot like work, but hiking. I've been hiking the White Mountains, and I'm up to 39 of the 48 peaks, and I'm planning a trip to do 2 more in a few weeks.
That's awesome. Casey, cookies, brownies, or ice cream? You can only pick one.
Ice cream.
What flavor?
Anything Ben and Jerry's.
Oh, Ben and Jerry's. But if you can only pick one Ben and Jerry's.
Fish.
Oh, fish food?
Yeah.
I just had a new Ben and Jerry's one. It was new to me. It's called Dirt. It's basically vanilla pudding ice cream with Oreo, and it was really good.
We should get ice cream after this.
We should. We're going to go get ice cream.
Are you buying?
Sure. We'll put it on the radio budget. Josh, cookies, brownies, ice cream.
Oh, ice cream, and definitely anything that's like cheesecake, like strawberry cheesecake ice
Really?
cream, something like that. I'm all about it.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Last question and 5 unrelated questions. We'll start with Josh. Who's your favorite teacher in school and why?
This might be a little unorthodox, but his name was Mr. LaBeouf, and he was my architectural kind of drafting teacher while I was in trade school. And my senior year, I told him I was going to UConn and I wanted to be an engineer, wanted to be an electrical engineer. And he goes, everybody look at Josh. He's going to be at UConn. He's going to be in some lab somewhere studying, in the dark and, somewhere off in the corner. And the more he talked, the less I was interested. I was like, that sounds awful. And I got to UConn, and it kind of dawned on me that I would be spending a lot of time indoors. And so I switched to natural resources because I want to spend all my time outdoors. So he kind of, I won't say he saved me from that career choice, but he definitely left an impact with his words. So
That's interesting. What about you, Casey? Favorite teacher and why?
Dr. Clark, he was my AP biology teacher my senior year in high school, and he just nurtured my love of all things biology. I think he saw something, a talent or just a love of a subject, and helped me nurture it, and it's probably one of the reasons why I'm talking to you today.
And that's why we asked that question, because teachers impact lives, and they don't get enough credit for it. So I love asking that question because I love giving people a chance to talk about their favorite teacher so that teachers out there who are listening can hear that you may not even know it, and you're impacting somebody's life. So I'm going to add a 6th question, but it's a related question, and we'll just do real quick. Josh, what's your favorite tree?
Oh, my favorite tree. Ooh, I would have to go with the pitch pine.
Why?
I love a pitch pine. They grow kind of scraggly, and they grow in these really kind of dry and weird locations, but they're resilient. They're no matter how bad the conditions are, they're always growing. They're always just trying to make it, and they have such character to them when you find them.
Interesting. I'll have to show you. Years ago, I drove up Mount Evans in Colorado. It's the highest paved road in North America. So the mountain's 14,700 feet. You can drive 14,500 feet of it. And right around 13,000 feet, there's like these windswept pines.
Yep.
Awesome. I'll have to show you pictures.
Please.
Casey, what is your favorite tree?
At the moment, it depends on the season, I think, for me, but at the moment, it's American chestnut. And it's just a really
And so, Casey,
tree that
we have
needs
about
all
3
of our
minutes.
help. Okay. It's a
So
tree.
talk about the chestnut tree.
Well,
for
it's
2.5
going to be a whole
minutes.
nother show if I
Okay.
can convince you, because there's a lot to talk about. But a blight came through in the early 1900s, wiped out probably 1 billion chestnut trees across the Appalachians from southern Georgia all the way up to southern Canada. And these trees have still been clinging. Ecologically, it's sort of been removed from the ecosystem of Appalachia, but there's still some trees out there, and we're trying to bring the species back. I do a lot of volunteer work for the American Chestnut Foundation, Connecticut chapter, and right now they're flowering, and tomorrow I will be pollinating some of those trees so that we can save the genome.
There you go. So I'm glad we're able to get that in, because I do know that chestnuts are very close to your heart and your soul. So there you have it, folks. We just spent almost a full hour talking about forests, and we could probably spend another hour talking about forests. If you're listening to the show, the one thing I would love for everybody to take away is the importance of forests, not only to the environment at large. Yes, they sequester carbon, they produce oxygen, but the importance of forests really to water quality. As we learned today, they are kind of the first filter that the water goes through before they make it into our homes. Healthy forest starts with, or healthy clean water starts with healthy forests. So with that, if you missed any part of today's show, you can definitely go on YouTube, New Haven Independence YouTube page, and watch us back again. I thank you for listening to this week's Liquid Lunch with the Regional Water Authority. Today we welcome the RWA's two foresters, Casey Cords and Josh Tracy, to the show. Let's end the show the way we always do. Take a big glass of tap water, raise it, and toast to good health. And we are recording this show on a day where it's nearly 100 degrees, so please stay hydrated and drink tap water.